Hi, it's Penny here, and today I wanted to share with you my thoughts on The First Law World by Joe Abercrombie. So this is a 10-book grimdark fantasy series where we follow multiple perspectives as they get wrapped up in the political and magical conflicts throughout this world. So we have several different countries, let's call them. Firstly, we have the Union, which is, as you might expect, kind of like the United Kingdom, has several different countries kind of being brought together and ruled by a central core. We also have the North, who are a little bit more Viking-esque, and then some other kingdoms around that we learn more about as we go along with the series. So high level, the series is broken up into one initial trilogy. Then we have 4 standalones. I put that in quotation marks because they are, of course, still connected to some degree. And then lastly, there is the Age of Madness trilogy, which is the last trilogy in the series. And I think it's likely that Joe Abercrombie will come back to this world at some point, but there's been no factual confirmation of when, so I guess we'll see. But for now, the series is complete. So the main thing that I love about this series is Joe Abercrombie's writing style. I know a lot of people, when they talk about this series, talk about the humor, and it does have this very particular grimdark or dark humor throughout all the books. And I think if that kind of humor appeals to you, then you will enjoy your time with these books. I did like the humor, but I will say I think the later books were less humorous, in my opinion. As well, I think sometimes Joe Abercrombie has these amazing lines that kind of just capture the reality of the world, even if sometimes it's a very dark and twisted perspective of that. Or even sometimes it's like a certain character will come to a conclusion and phrase it so eloquently or so succinctly, even though you as the reader kind of know that the conclusion they're drawing is false. There's still kind of a certain satisfaction to that, seeing somebody so succinctly saying the opposite of what you believe. But also, because Joe Abercrombie's character development is so great, you can often see why those characters would believe what they believe. So that's another thing that I really love about what Joe Abercrombie does, is he creates such great characters that they really do feel real. And when you start a chapter, you can tell pretty much straight away whose perspective you're reading from just by the way that it's written. And it's weird that sometimes you won't really even like the characters as people, but you can still enjoy reading from their perspective. And in some ways, he manages to write some very despicable characters but make reading from their perspective still enjoyable. And it's something about the way he does humor and the way he does those insightful lines. Although, again, I would say for me, as the series went on, I felt like there were less of those lines that were having a big impact on me. But still, I think you have to be impressed with the scope of the world that Joe Abercrombie has built, especially in terms of it's not just the different countries and the whole continent of world that he's built. It's also the tapestry of characters. So throughout the series, characters that will be main characters in one book will turn up as side characters in another book. And so then when you're reading a scene, you not only know what's going on from the perspective of the character that you're reading from, but because you know so many of the other characters in the scene as well as you do, you feel like you kind of know what their perspective of things is going to be as well. And sometimes just little glimpses of side characters in the background or previous main characters in the background of a book later in the series will give you a clue to everything else that character has been up to in the meantime. And I think that there's definitely a lot more that you could get from this series by going through and doing a reread and really picking out a lot of those details. Now, I personally don't think that I'm invested enough to go through and do that, but I can see that some people would be. For me, I didn't really feel like there was enough magic in the world. The first trilogy had a little bit, and I actually really loved the way that the magic in that first trilogy was done. We're given just little glimpses of this magic that seems very incomprehensible and magical, and we're also learning kind of about the magical history of this world. But somehow, even with 10 books in the series, we never seem to get to any kind of conclusion in terms of what's happening with this kind of magical conflict that's going on. And actually, we never really get any kind of satisfying conclusion in these books. With a lot of other authors who are creating this big tapestry of characters and plots and world, it would all kind of be coming together, or maybe this is just I've read too much Sanderson. With Sanderson, it would all kind of come together into some kind of satisfying, cohesive thing at the end, but that's not how Joe Abercrombie is writing books and not what he wants to do at all. He's trying to write something that's a little bit more realistic, and in the real world, we don't get things coming together in a satisfying way like that. Like sometimes there's a few things, and that does happen in the First Law books, but it's not like a big suddenly it all comes together and you go, wow, that was amazing. It's no Sanderlanche. But I guess some people would find it satisfying that it's a little bit more real world, a little bit more realistic. But for me, I think it always made me a little bit disappointed with the ending of things. And often with these books, our characters are kind of going on a bit of a journey where they're learning things, they're becoming better people, and then in the end, it all ends up for nothing. Everyone ends up kind of back where they started. Especially in the last trilogy, there are a lot of parallels to everything that happened in the first trilogy, and kind of this whole idea that history just keeps repeating itself to some degree. And actually, in terms of repetition, the last book, The Wisdom of Crowds, had a lot of repetition in terms of some themes that Joe Abercrombie was trying to focus on, just kept hitting it over and over and over, and I did not need that, and so that was quite frustrating to me. So actually, let's break things down a little bit. The first trilogy, the First Law Trilogy, it's confusing that it's the First Law series, but also the First Law Trilogy. But the First Law Trilogy, actually, I have it behind me. Oh no, I just have this book behind me, the last book in the series. So in this one, we follow some characters who end up getting involved with the first of the Magi, takes them on a bit of a quest. He is very manipulative in terms of what he's trying to achieve in the world, while to some degree our other characters are just trying to get by, trying to survive. I do think I love the characters in the first trilogy the most, and like I said, it does have the most magic compared to the rest of the books. So I think I would say the first trilogy is my favorite part of the series, and if you're wanting to give this series a try but you're not sure, you could just commit to reading that first trilogy. Then next in the series we have Best Served Cold. So this we follow a woman who has an attempted assassination of herself and decides that she's going to get revenge on the 7 people that she believes are responsible. So she gathers together a group of toughs and poisoners and people with different skills that might be useful if you're hoping to get revenge, gathers them together, and they basically just go through her list and start killing people off. It's a little bit like Kill Bill, and I do think actually when I read this, I was disappointed because I was hoping to get more of the characters that I love from the original trilogy. And so at the time, I think I felt disappointed a little bit in the series, but when I look back on it, I actually think this was my second favorite bit of the series. And I would read this again because I think I would enjoy it more on a reread. It is a little bit predictable in terms of, she wants to get revenge on these 7 people and we just kind of work through it. Things always go wrong, but they also kind of always work out in the end. And I think this often happens through Joe Abercrombie's books is that he somehow manages to have the endings be both shocking and predictable, or like sometimes they're unpredictable in a predictable way. Like once you know the way that Joe Abercrombie is twisting the endings, it kind of becomes predictable, but it's not necessarily predictable in a disappointing way, if that makes sense. Then the next standalone is The Heroes. So this is continuing the conflict between the Union and the North and is basically set over 3 days of this big battle. Now, I don't tend to like battle scenes, and even though I will admit Joe Abercrombie writes them fairly well, this had too many battle scenes for my taste. But it's told from the perspective of a bunch of different people involved in the battle. Some of them are the leadership, so they're not so involved in the actual battles, so you get a little bit more than just fight scenes. And I do think when I read The Heroes, I felt a little bit like what happened in that wasn't that important. However, now having read the last trilogy, The Age of Madness, I think some of the information or some of the characters you get to know in The Heroes become more important in The Age of Madness. And so The Heroes is worth reading before you get to The Age of Madness. Actually, I was gonna say, if you want to try this series and you don't want to commit to a lot, like you don't even want to commit to that first trilogy, you could just read Best Served Cold, but I probably wouldn't start anywhere else. And then I would definitely read that first trilogy before you read Red Country. Red Country is kind of a weird one in this series. It's a little bit more of a Western, but not really. We're following some characters that for reasons, are going out into the west where there is a bit of a gold rush. It's like a desert type place. Like, it's got those western vibes, but most of the time it's just some characters kind of going on a journey and then setting up in this town. So the characters we're following kind of have different reasons for going out west, but they end up traveling together. And there's kind of a smaller part to the story about what's happened to some children that have been kidnapped. That almost does come together in a bit of a magical way in the end, but once again, not as much magic as I would have liked. Like, we spent a lot of time on the parts of the story that I wasn't interested in. Then when we got to like the interesting bit, it was like, oh well, story over. So I think this was actually probably my least favorite part of the series. Although the next one, Sharp Ends, also wasn't my favorite. Sharp Ends is shorter than all the rest, and it's a short story anthology, so it's made up of a bunch of short stories. There are a few that stick to the same characters, so it is linked together a little bit, but there's also some that are kind of just giving you the backstory of other characters you already know. And I think if you told me I was going to get the backstory of those characters, I would have been excited, but when I got them, they weren't really what I wanted. And I think you could skip Sharp Ends and it wouldn't have any kind of significant impact on your enjoyment of the series. I think it's probably only worth reading if you're someone who really wants to like get every detail, but I've probably forgotten most of those short stories at this point. And then finally we have the Age of Madness trilogy. Now, I know a lot of people say that this is their favorite trilogy within the series, and as I've said, the first trilogy was my favorite, so I completely disagree. However, having just talked about Red Country and the Heroes and Sharp Ends, I do think Age of Madness was better than those. So in Age of Madness, we're kind of following some characters that are in the generation following the generation from the first original trilogy. Although some of those original characters are around more as background characters. And it was nice to see little bits of them again. I do think, weirdly, for a grimdark story, there was a little bit too much romance for me in this final trilogy. And I just didn't really care about a lot of the character motivations, whereas in the first trilogy, I was very invested in the different characters and what they were trying to achieve or what they wanted. Whereas, did I care if the characters in the final trilogy got what they wanted? No, I kind of wanted to see them suffer, which I did get. But there was also kind of quite a political focus in this last trilogy because we have the Industrial Revolution and kind of this uprising of the people against some of the practices that have come into place as part of that. So it is very aligned with real history, but I just felt like some of that political messaging was a little bit repetitive. Like, I got the point the first time and the second time and the 10th time. I didn't need it as many times as we got it. There were some very shocking parts in the series that I particularly loved, but in the end, I kind of felt a little bit unsatisfying that things didn't come together more at the end. I mean, when I think about it, some things did come together, but I think it could have been a little bit more. So I kind of hope we do get some more in this series because I think there is still a lot of potential for what could happen next. And it did seem like the very end of the last book was setting up for something more. So I guess we'll see. The only other thing I wanted to say that I haven't mentioned is the audiobooks are really great. I read most of the books physically, but a couple of the ones that I wasn't really enjoying, I did resort to the audiobooks. And I do think the audiobooks were very listenable and the performance is very impressive. So if you like audiobooks, this is a series you could listen to on audiobook. But I guess that is all I have to say about this series. Let me know if you've read any of the books in this series. Did you like them? Do you agree with what I have to say, or were there any things you disagreed about? I would love to chat with you about it down in the comments. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.